Hello and welcome back to 30 Minutes of Faith with your host, Frederick Smith. Today, I got a good friend of mine that's back in town. His name is Mark Grable. He was on my show Step by Step once before, but today he's back, and I wanted to have him on today to talk a little bit about how he felt about the pandemic that we're in, and also the election season that we're in, and how the church and Christianity all mesh in this environment that we find ourselves in now. So if you don't mind, if you'll sit back and relax with me and take a little walk with Mr. Mark Grable here on 30 Minutes of Faith.
Well, I'm glad to be back with Fred. He was telling me earlier that it's been almost 3 years since I've seen him, and time flies, but I've been spending about half my time in Brazil, going back and forth, got involved, just felt the Lord's call to go down there almost 4 years ago. In September, it'll be 4 years that I went down there. So that's, a part of the journey that I'm on right now, and just looking for the Lord's direction and guidance here, and being concerned, like all of us are, about this pandemic that we're in, and what does it mean, and how does that relate to biblical, what the Bible has to say. Are we in the end times, and many questions, and I think for me, I just have to look at it and just say, the reality is that no political party has the answers to the problems we have right now with this pandemic. It's not, and I believe in some way, God has allowed it. I don't understand. I'm not going to sit here and say I understand it all, but I think it's for us, especially us as followers of Jesus, to look at the reality is that our only hope in salvation is in Jesus, not political parties, Republican, Democrat. They're just people, and we're not to look at them to solve these issues that are bigger than them, bigger than us, and many times the reality is we're being told misinformation or lied to at times, or there's so much fighting, so much division about the evidence, quote, quote, the scientific evidence of this pandemic and where we're at. It leaves a lot of confusion. And we know from the Bible that God is not the author of confusion. So that being said, who is really responsible for this craziness that's going on? Well, we live in a fallen, broken world. And the Bible tells us that this world is Satan's domain. And as followers of Jesus, we know the spiritual battle that we're up against. I mean, if you've been following Jesus any time at all, the battles, the trials, the tribulations, they're real. And just for me being honest, I have a hard time with people that have Christians that have this prosperity doctrine that without suffering, without pain, because the reality is, any of us that have followed Jesus for any time at all have had suffered trials, problems, tribulations, pain, and suffering, and they're to make our faith stronger, to make our relationship with Jesus stronger. And it's difficult. I've failed many tests, but God has never failed me. When I truly look to Him and fix my eyes on Him for my answers, He always comes through somehow, some way. Most of the times in ways I don't expect or don't understand, but completely. It's a walk by faith. Like it says here on the wall somewhere, we walk by faith. Fred's got a picture here in the house. It says we walk by faith, not by sight. And that's the reality. And it's hard in these times when we want to understand what to do about kids, grandkids going to school, not to go to school, and all. That's just one of the things that we're facing with. But at the end of the day, it gets back to our trust in God, that He is our Savior, not a political party, not America, not a philosophy, but Jesus. And it's I believe God's doing this for a purpose. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I understand it all. I don't. But I believe He's refining us. And this is a process that we all go through as followers of Jesus. We're going to be refined. We're going to be, go through tests and trials and battles. And all of us, we've never seen anything like this in our lifetime about a pandemic and how it's impacted our lives, our daily lives, where we can go, where we can't go, wearing a mask, not to wear a mask, going to school, where the kids can go to school or not go to school. It's, all these things that affects our everyday life. But the reality is that this world and this life, when we really boil it down, this is all material and it's temporal. That's the reality. This is just a temporary world. We as followers of Jesus told us we're not of this world. This world is not our home. And His kingdom was not of this world. And I think that so often I know people, they well-intentioned, they want to believe, and I'm talking people that profess to be Christians, and I believe they are. It's not my place to judge them, or if they believe Jesus is the Savior, that's and they confess Jesus. The Bible says, all right, they're for Christ. They're not anti-Christ. They're not against Christ. But we can get mixed up in our politics and stuff, and it gets real because it affects our real world, thinking that the left or the right or the conservative, the liberal, on and on and on, this battle rages. And the reality is we all just need to get our eyes fixed on Jesus. Followers of Jesus. This is what Jesus said, if He was lifted up, He'd draw all men to Him. And I think we as the believers, followers, church of Jesus, that's our number one job, is to look to Jesus, lift His name up, and especially during these times when there's so much uncertainty, that we as a church, by the grace of God, we need to be the soldiers for Jesus. I mean, I've heard people talking about that, and the reality is that's what we need to be. We need to be soldiers for Jesus. The churches, the history of the church, there has been martyrs throughout the history of the church. There's been those that have gone and laid their lives down to preach the gospel all over the world. Super sacrificial missionaries that have laid their lives down, literally, for preaching the gospel. And I feel like we're in that period of time right now to where we're being, the Bible says judgment begins at the house of God. God is working on His body, working on His church, all of us. And we have a choice, to emphasize the spiritual and to point people to Jesus. And that's, I think, our number one goal, not to a political party and say, oh, they've got the answer, and it's really divisive. The politics is just so divisive. And we know that, the enemy, the Bible says, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Well, that type of arguing, that type of fighting is clearly not from God. It's from a spiritual enemy of ours, what we call the devil, the spiritual side, the dark side of the spiritual battles, the kingdom of Satan. He is king of this world. Jesus was taken up and showed the whole world when He was, after His 40 days in the wilderness. The devil took Him up, the Bible tells us, and showed Him the whole world, that He had domain over it, and He offered it to Jesus, and Jesus refused and said, no. My kingdom's not of this world. It's not flesh and blood. So I think this is something we need to really focus on and realize that all these things that's in our minds about what's happening, this world is not our ultimate destination. It's not our heavenly home. It's temporary. We're just passing through. And it's really tempting and easy to try to make our home here heaven, on earth. But the reality is it's not. This is not our home. So it's a battle. It's a struggle. Because we're humans. We want the comforts of the flesh, and there's nothing wrong with being comfortable, and the Lord gives us many things that are comfortable. But if we make a god out of them, if we make an idol out of them, if we make them too important, then it becomes a problem for us, and throughout, Israel had all kinds of problems with idol worship, the history of reading the Old Testament, and I think, we as Christians today, it's easy for us to, like how Israel came out of Egypt was one thing, but to get Egypt out of them was another thing. And this is our battle, to not let the world be in us. We're in the world, but not of the world, but not to have the world where it dominates us, it controls us. Our flesh and the desires of this world, it's a struggle. We're here, we got to pay our bills, we got to do different things, but not to the point of where it's the most important thing in our lives. And I feel like this is a purging time for us as individuals, as Christians, and it's a testing time. And yeah, we're getting, I believe, that we're getting close to the return of Jesus. I believe that there's things that Jesus talked about that when he was, asked by his disciples about the temples and the buildings around the temple compound, they're asking him, what will be the sign of your return in the end of the world? And he went on to say a lot of things, but one of the things he said that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, he talked about Daniel the prophet. He said, whoso readeth, let him understand, Matthew 24:15. And Daniel is full of prophecies about the time of the end. And then Revelation picks up, but obviously Revelation hadn't been written when Jesus was here on earth and when the disciples were asking him about the end of the world and when he was going to return. But Jesus referred us to Daniel. He said, read Daniel. Whoso reads, let him understand what Daniel's saying. And there's many prophecies in there about the time of the end time, that those that understand among the people shall instruct many, that Daniel was saying, about the time of the end. And don't be deceived that by false prophets, false teachers, and there's many out there. Jesus, in Matthew 24, read it. Jesus said, there's going to be many come in my name. Many false teachers, many false prophets. But he that endures unto the end shall be saved. And so we really need to be students, and I'm speaking to myself, is that we need to really be students of the Word, rightly dividing the Word of truth. And because there are so many teachers, false and true, but Jesus said there's going to be many false prophets, many false teachers in the last times, in the last days. And I think we're seeing that. There's so much confusion, and this pandemic is just, to me, evidence of it. You hear so much confusion. One day they're saying this, one day they're saying that. It really is an eye-opener in the reality of, okay, this world is not our home, and the problems that we are facing, they're bigger than us, and we need God. We need Jesus. We need his help to help us in our daily walk. And he said, don't get so preoccupied with the cares of this life, because it chokes out the word. And this is the reality. I know in my own life, when I've got my mind so focused on money, good things, family, different things, those are wonderful blessings from God. But if I get so focused on them, the cares of this world, that it chokes out the word in my life. And this is what Jesus said, be forewarned about. Don't let it choke the word out in our lives. And this is, I see the mercy of God in my life. And I would just, encourage everybody just, to keep going. Jesus said he'll never leave us, never forsake us.
Mr. Grable is a man that has had to face some adversities in life. Mr. Grable has been divorced. He's even had to face the decision of life and death before in his life. He's had the obstacles of ups and downs, and all he had was Jesus Christ. So let's continue to walk along with him as he tells us about his faith in Christ Jesus.
Yeah, Fred just asked me what the role should be of the church, the believers, followers of Jesus, be in times of like this crisis, this pandemic, this economic thing that's going on in this country right now. And as followers of Jesus, I mean, we just need to go to Jesus' example. In my view, in the Gospels, where he gave us so many stories and lessons. One of them that comes to mind is about the Good Samaritan. You know, the Good Samaritan was, at the time, Samaritans were considered the enemies of the Jews at that time. And Jesus was talking predominantly to Jewish people. And because they're asking, well, who is my enemy? Who's my neighbor? What should I do about my neighbor? Who should I love? Because Jesus was talking about loving our neighbors as ourselves. To first love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And then love our neighbor as ourselves. And then love our enemies, which is what? Love our enemies. And then pray for those that treat you badly, to pray for them. And I think this is, really the crux of the matter is we as followers of Jesus we're called and commanded by Jesus to love our neighbors as ourselves and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I've heard wonderful testimonies of different churches all over the United States that are, during this crisis, are doing more. Not doing less, they're doing more as far as, putting up food banks, helping people in need. So this is what we're called to do, to love, to sacrifice and to love and to give. And I think this is our call as Christians. This is not only our call, but it's our command. Jesus said, "This is commandment I give unto you, to love your neighbor as yourself." And then the people at the time that Jesus was talking to said, "Well, who is my neighbor?" And then he gave them the illustration of the Samaritan. And at that time, Jews and Samaritans had no dealings with each other. They were enemies. And this is why, obviously, Jesus chose to give us the example of the Samaritan. Because there was no relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans. And I think we as followers of Jesus, we need to be the light on the hill in all communities, reaching out to one another. And in light of these, the protest about racial injustice and things that's happened in this country over hundreds of years, the fact is, yes, there obviously has been racial injustice. The only way that we could deny it is if we just refuse to see it. But the truth is, it's there. It's been obvious. And it's just that people have, I think it's hard for a lot of, speaking from white history of listening to people my whole life talk, and the reality, what I've seen traveling and living in a lot of cities in the United States, is that there is still, a systemic prejudice against, black people. We're called here in America African Americans, but I was just thinking of people in Brazil. They're not Americans, but there's many people that are black that were part of the slavery that was brought to South America, because my fiance's mom, her great grandmother was a slave from Africa, and they, I'm listening, heard some stories, and it was just like, wow. The reality of things like that kind of really takes on another perspective. And then looking at, the racial and financial injustice I've seen my whole life in this country towards people that, were black and, I don't know about I'm sure there's problems, how the Hispanic community, but my more experience has been with people black, where I grew up in Detroit and then traveled different cities, seeing it as a kid and hearing it, and then it's just like, wow, where's Jesus in all this? Where's the real love? And sometimes I did see, there were good examples. I'm not going to say there wasn't, but there's also many examples of people's hatred towards black people, in this country. And I mean, that's, and call ourselves Christians. And I hate to say it, but it's true. I've been around some churches and some people in my lifetime that just didn't, they talked about Jesus, but then when it came to the reality of, I know, I mean, because when we came back, we went to Australia in 1988, I believe it was, and we took a young teenager with us who was black. And when we came back, we ended up, make a long story short, we ended up in North Georgia, in Blairsville, and then we ended up going to a church, and he came and visited us and stayed with us for a while up in Blairsville, but I was told by some people that this was not a good place for him. And it's just like, I was like, what? And these are people in the church. And I was like, oh my God, this is, what are we doing? What kind of a example? What, it breaks your heart, but it's like the reality of the world we live in, and so it's just like, I, obviously couldn't understand from being a black, the perspective of black people, but then to hear this and see this, it's just like from people that were supposed to be of faith, love Jesus, and saying things like that, just, broke my heart, and just like, this is the reality that I've grown up with in America, and so I think, honestly, white people need to, think and reflect and pray about, okay, especially, this, oh, I'm not prejudiced, or I'm not this or that, but I know stuff still goes on because I've heard it, and like I said, that was just one example I gave there, and I just, I mean, the economic, wrote something on Facebook a while ago about traveling to different cities around the United States, and there was the poor part of town and then the wealthier part of town. And in almost every circumstance I can think of, was the white part of town, was the wealthy part of town, everything, where all the money, schools, everything. And then you go to the black part of the city, and it was just the opposite. There wasn't the shopping centers, there wasn't this, they didn't have the money for the schools, and that, that's a reality, that's a shame, that's a blight, or whatever you want to call it, on this country. It's not, it shouldn't be that way, but it is. That's the reality. I know many people can say, well, it's gotten better. Okay, it has. I'm not saying that it hasn't, but it's still not where where it should be, especially as many Christians as we have in this country, professing Christians all over this country. And there are so many things that individuals can do, and I know that there's many beautiful Christians of all races out there that lay down their lives for Jesus in this country, but then there's the vast majority that just like kind of asleep, and I think the problem is that the indifference, people get so involved with their life, the cares of this world, that they don't have a broken heart for or we don't have a broken heart for injustice when it's all around us, if we're really looking, and where we could be a help and a blessing, in situations. You may say, well, what can I do? But we can all do something. We can all, what would Jesus do? Just pray and say, what would Jesus do? I'm not a millionaire, I'm not a billionaire, I don't own a company, I don't do blah, 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 whatever, but we can all do something. And when we see injustice and we see things that are wrong, we need to, to speak up and say, hey, that's not right, that's wrong, and So I think, this can be an opportunity in America to either, especially in the church. I hate even to say America because God's so much bigger. I think we in America think that the world revolves around America, when the reality is it's some 4 or 5% of the population of the world are Americans. So we are 95, 96% of the world is outside this country. And I don't think God is going, oh yeah, America is, I'm only really focused on America. No, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe God looks at it that way. That's not what His Word teaches. And I know there's a lot of good things that have come from this country, but I'm going to say most of those are the missionaries, the people that really loved Jesus, that went into all the world and laid their life down. Some literally gave their lives for preaching the gospel, to tell people about Jesus. That's the best thing about this country. Not our military, not how much money we have, not all the things that we boast about. No. It's, in my view, that's God's not impressed by our military. God's not impressed by our wealth, because when comparing it to God, it's so little. We're so small, and I think this pride and this patriotism for America it's idolatry. It's a form of idolatry. And how could God bless that? How could God say, oh yeah, I think that's really good that you guys are worshiping your flag, worshiping your idols, worshiping the... No, I mean, just like, Israel many times was judged by God, over the course of centuries, and for their, falling away and turning to idols, turning to different things. They knew the one true God, but they got misled. They got deceived by their own lusts, their own hearts, following the things, and then they got involved in other countries where God sent them, drove them out of Israel, and brought armies in judgment against Israel. This is the reality. This is the history of Israel. And we need to be really humble and careful before the Lord about our haughtiness as a country, because God, in my view, this is, I'm shocked He hasn't already done more, things to bring us to our knees, because in my view, this is, good for us to be brought to our knees, to show us how without Him, we're nothing without Him. Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. And just because we profess Him and talk about Him doesn't mean we know Him. And that there's a lot of talk about Jesus, a lot of talk about many things, from politics and different things. But I just, I'm just a creation, one of God's children. But and it's only Jesus. He rescued me, and He still rescues me from myself. I love the verses, "Oh wretched man that I am," that Paul said, "Who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" Jesus. There's no condemnation. This is not about condemning anybody, because in Jesus we're set free.
I am so glad that I had the opportunity today to be able to sit down with my old friend Mark Grable and have him sit down and give us some great words of encouragement. So until next time, here on 30 Minutes of Faith, you all stay safe, God bless, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.